Hi, I'm Alie Dumas-Heidt, and you're listening to The Writer's Journey, where I chat with fellow authors about their earliest beginnings and answer everyone's favorite question, what happens next? On this episode, I'm talking with author, attorney, mom, and sometimes painter Kenna about her earliest memories with books and the inspiration for her latest novel, Burn This Night. Hi, Alex. Thank you for talking with me today. We're going to talk in a minute about your fabulous book, Burn the Night, This Night. I wasn't going to screw that up. It's your title. Yeah, Burn This Night. I know what it is. First, I'm going to ask you a few quick fire questions just to kind of get things started. And I want you to answer these as little kid Alex would have answered.
Boy. Okay.
Yeah. Not hard. Favorite Muppet?
Miss Piggy.
Of course.
Of course.
Best Saturday cartoon?
Captain Planet?
Ah, okay.
The first one that came to mind.
Yeah, go with that. Skates, or it might have been rollerblades, you're younger than me, or bikes?
Oh God, I was clumsy. We'll go with a bike after lots of trying.
Okay. Training wheels were good.
Yeah.
Favorite breakfast cereal?
Oh God, Rice Krispies treat cereal.
Yeah, the little clusters.
Yeah, basically dessert crumbled up with milk on top.
Those were always the best. I mean, there was ice cream cone candy when I was a kid, so.
Oh yeah, no concept of future diabetes. It was just all sugar all the time.
All sugar, all good. All right. Staying with your younger self, were you a big reader as a kid?
I was a big reader, but I was a really slow reader. It took me a long time to learn how to read. Like parents probably thought I was a little on the slow side for a little bit. And then I started reading a lot, but it would take it just took me a long time to get through a book. But yeah, definitely liked the Goosebumps, liked all the creepy books for children.
Right. The scarier, the better.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Okay. All right. Was there a first favorite book, one that you had to read or read over and over again?
I don't know if there was a favorite book, but in terms of like series, like I definitely remember inhaling all the Goosebumps books. And then I discovered this writer named John Belair. So when I was a kid, he's kind of like better written Goosebumps, probably a lot like the Harry Potter kind of stuff, with creepy children, melancholy vibe, cover illustrated by Edward Gorey. And I just kind of inhaled all of those books. So that definitely, there was one I remember called A Trolley to Yesterday about these creepy children who go back in time to like 15th century Constantinople, and it was really wild. So yeah, not a favorite book, but definitely had a couple favorite series.
I think a lot of us who fell in love with books at a young age were often kind of guided to books from someone else, whether it was a parent or a grandparent or a teacher. A lot of us had kind of that push. Was there that figure in your life that kind of pushed you towards books?
Oh yeah, for sure. My mother would read to me. I would have these like baroquely extravagant bedtimes where we would just read, for an hour, and then my bored and lonely dad would like come in to peek in to see if bedtime is going on, and if in fact it still was. So I was lucky in that regard. And I also I had my grandparents lived near us in DC, and they were a huge influence on me. And my grandmother, she was she kind of delightfully evil French lady who had this this very kind of magical attic that was just filled with art books. And that was, I would spend, God knows how long I'd go over there, and I'd spend the night, and I could go up into the attic, and it was just, wall to wall books filled with, these incredible colored pictures of all different things. So it wasn't, it was definitely arts, and it was books, even if it wasn't necessarily that kind of narrative push.
The attic sounds like a story that needs to be written in and of itself.
Oh yeah, she'll be a character at some point. She's very noir.
Yeah, I love it. Do you think it was a natural transition for you then to move from being a reader to becoming a writer?
I wouldn't say so. I think you're there's a confidence that you need, I think, in order to write a book. And I mean, obviously,
Yes.
in a way that you don't have, I think, for the other arts, as I think just the and um, it took me kind of a long time to feel like I had kind of experienced enough of life, I think, to try to put something down on a page, you know, as a and I did painting and I dabbled in
Right.
music badly, but there's just something about, the way we think about writing a book where I never would have touched something like that until I was further into adulthood.
It's a very interesting take. Because I knew that you were a painter. Um, what would be the difference? I mean, what is the difference for you? The feeling that you have between being ready to paint something and being ready to put words on a page rather than, you know, an image on a page.
I don't know. I mean, part of it is, I think, the books that you're exposed to a lot, at least, when I was growing up, you have a lot of they're very kind of male centric. They're
Right.
very kind of, from an older perspective, you don't, you wouldn't have any kind of concept about somebody who's like in their 20s trying to put together a book. And, I think there's a certain level of realism in terms of creating a world that you expect from a book that you don't really necessarily need for a painting. It's kind of one image that's frozen in time. Um, and you have and people there's just more of a sense of kids making them. You're a
Oh,
kid, you get some crayons, you get a piece of paper, here's my drawing. It doesn't really matter if it's good.
right.
And then eventually you do that enough and voila, it is good. But there's just something about, creating this whole world and expecting people to pick it up and read it that's very daunting, I think.
Yes. So, moving from that very daunting task, what was your early writing endeavors like, or what were they like?
Oh God.
Was it as I'm taking it wasn't a hobby as a kid to write.
No, I was much more focused on painting, and harmonica. I was a very avid, because I
I
had a
love it.
good ear and no hand-eye coordination, so it was perfect. Um, so, I started writing at times when I really didn't have physical access to painting. So, after college, when I was, like, living in, lousy rooms and shared apartments, I started doing art reviews and art criticism and writing in that way. And then when I was in law school, I wrote a book of um, really mean, kind of occasionally X-rated limericks about my and my friends' ex-boyfriends.
Perfect.
So that I actually did have an agent who was interested in that book, but it dawned on me that I didn't think I could really have a legal career with this thing out in the world. Also, I'm not a total sociopath, so I kind of clawed that one back. But and then I finished law school. Like I got back into painting, and then I started thinking about writing again when um, I was thinking about having kids, and I didn't want to be covered in kind of toxic paint all the time and have them, who knows what that is going to do. So then I kind of got
Right.
to writing, and then tried fiction for the first time, and it was like something clicked. It was, I had enough experience in the world. I had worked in the criminal justice system, and I realized that this was something that I could do. And I just kind of caught the bug.
So that actually leads right into the next question is, what was the magic moment for you once you started writing again when you decided you were going to do crime novels?
I love true crime, and I watched a lot of like thrillers on TV and movies, and would just inhale them. Um, and then I would read a ton of true crime. I listened to true crime podcasts. I read true crime book. I loved all that stuff. Watched the documentaries. Loved all that stuff. And the like microscopic switch in my brain of like there are fictional versions of crime that you should also try. Just for some reason didn't happen, until I think my 30s. And then sort of around the same time, I discovered, Tana French and thought like that
Hmm.
I did like just devoured her whole series. Thought she's fantastic. And then I kind of had an idea for a book, which didn't end up happening. It was, there was a really contentious Supreme Court justice hearing. And I'm a political show, so I'll keep it sanitary. Um, and I'll say, like, first of all, like, I am anti-assassination, like, not like nobody should kill anyone. But just from a fictional perspective, like, it occurred to me, like, these, as a potential plot,
Right.
these things can happen. And I ended up writing a political thriller, which it was like in 2018, 2019. It involved stealing an election. It'll never see the light of day. No one wants to read that. That's never gonna happen. But it was kind of just like this idea that just kind of popped into my head, and then I just sort of thought I would try it, and then just kind of found myself stealing every spare moment. I was just kind of like, typing and trying to make and turning this thing into a book. But it was really kind of just like the light switch went off in my head and I started doing it.
A little bit psychic, maybe.
Yeah, no, maybe.
So your first novel, we just talked about, the one that isn't going to see the
Hmm.
light of day, you still completed it.
Yes.
What was that moment? Because I have experienced those moments, I know, but for you, that last sentence, putting that period there, whether you put the end at the bottom of the page or not, what was that feeling for you when it was done? You had that baby ready to go out into the world, whether
Yeah.
it did or not.
There's it's hard to describe that sense that you have created this thing from thin air. It's just, you know, I mean, there's honestly, I don't think I can. I'm going to say something. I can't really come up with words other than something that sounds totally cliche, like magical, or. But there's really nothing.
Magical is actually what I wrote.
Yeah, that's just really nothing like that moment where you've just the characters feel alive. You've created this world that didn't exist before, and then it's immediately followed by this crushing neurotic feeling of this is this is never going to happen again. How am I ever going to write a book? This is the only book I will ever write. I don't
Mhm.
have an idea right now for
Yep.
the next book, and that's also a very powerful feeling.
Yes, in a very different direction.
Yes.
Very, very much. When you do start on a project at the beginning, do you start with the story idea in your head and create the characters to fit that story? Or do you start with the characters and let them kind of tell you what kind of story they want to play in?
It kind of depends on which book. I mean, the first book I kind of had just an idea that what was I was going to do, and then my my second book, or my first actual book that I wrote, that came into the world, What Meets the Eye. I wanted to write a art related mystery because I had the art background and I had the criminal justice background, so I kind of consciously started with that, and I wanted to write about art forgery because I'd gotten kind of obsessed with art forgery, and it was partly because I grew up in museums. I grew up going to the Smithsonian all the time with my grandmother and with my mother because it was free, and you start recognizing different artists. And I had seen this documentary about this crazy man who made forgeries and just gave them away to museums, and they would just put them up, and he had all these pictures all over the world. And then and then there was another British show about, is my painting real? Is it not real? And my husband and I just started noticing that when you go to museums, a lot of times if you see something that just doesn't look like the artist and you're like, I don't think so. It's always a gift because they don't do their due
Uh-huh.
diligence. And
On a
so I kind of
gift.
had this idea in my head, and I wanted to do something about art forgery, and I wanted to, slam the art world a little bit, which I had kind of almost been a part of, and, you know, slam, the kind of art that makes it to the top. So I kind of started out with that idea, and then I built the characters around it. And I had, the victim in that book is this borderline psychopathic artist who's, has more of myself in her than I should admit. Yeah, so that one I kind of started with the idea, and then um, Burn This Night. Yeah, I'm gonna be cheesy again. Yeah,
I,
you got to do it.
I was ready.
But I had different ideas that I kind of started with the ideas and the idea of different types of relationships. Like I have a character who slowly destroys his mind with meth, who's based on someone I know and who's also based on people I saw in the court system. And I wanted to have these siblings who kind of responded in opposite ways, and one just backs off and doesn't want to have anything to do with him, and the other kind of jumps in with both feet and wants to do anything she can, would do anything to help her brother, which is also something that you see a lot. And I was thinking about those siblings, and then I have another subplot that has to do with kind of DNA surprises, and then the kind of psychological upset of suddenly realizing that your entire narrative that you grew up with is completely false. And on top of that, because I'm a sadist, maybe you're related to a killer. So I kind of started with those ideas and built the plot around it. Honest, I have a very ADD brain, so usually I get different ideas of things that I think would want to be um, that I want to write about, and then I try to cram them together and see if I can do it. Right now I'm struggling a little because I have a couple very different things, and I'm trying to force them into a book together, and they're like, "This is stupid," but
We
I
don't
think I
want to
will
play.
wrangle them in the end.
Perfect. All right, we're going to switch gears in a minute, talk about the latest book, but we're going to do a little this or that first. So just first thing off your head, don't think about it too hard. There's no points. And this is current Alex. We don't have to play with childhood anymore. M&Ms or Skittles?
M&Ms all the way.
Brunch or cocktails?
Oh, cocktails. Oh,
Beach resorts or ski resorts?
oh, I'm not getting on skis. That would be a beach. Anything that doesn't involve coordination.
Okay. Movie theater or streaming from the couch?
Well, I don't have a babysitter and I have 2 small kids, so I'm gonna go with movie theater, and I want it to be one of those plush ones with velvet seats and where I can have a glass of wine.
Right. They bring it right to your seat.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I like the recliners personally. Like let me kick my feet up.
Oh, yeah. It's gotta be a little too loud, a little too cold. I want my caramel corn bucket.
Yes. I had a movie blanket that I used to take with me.
Oh, that
Brilliant.
sounds divine.
They sold it to me, so. All right. To the new book, the latest book, which is Burn This Night. It's fabulous. I have my signed copy. When you're writing, is there a ritual you fall into around your day-to-day schedule, or is it just you get words on a page whenever you can?
It's whenever I can, and it's in some ways I've kind of learned to work with the desperation of, "Oh my god, I have to write now." So, like, earlier this week, my youngest had, like, his, 27,000th childhood disease, and so I had to keep him home, and then he fell asleep in the car, right after having a diaper situation, so he's, like, wearing nothing but a diaper and a parka, and he's asleep, so I can't move him, and there was nowhere to park near my house, so, I ended up parked in some random street, but I had my computer. So he's asleep and I'm grabbing my computer and, I'm kind of trying to maneuver around the steering wheel and be like, let me see if I can write that. So that's a pretty typical writing experience.
Okay. How did your process change then between writing your first novel, and writing Burn This Night?
Yeah, completely. It completely changed, and a lot of it is life circumstance. So, like, I will say my pet peeve is you see a lot of interviews from, like, older, really successful male writers, and it'll be like, "What advice do you have?" And they'll be like, "You should write every day." And I'm like, "F you. F you. My God. I would love to write every day. That would be such a magical gift. That is not gonna
Right?
happen." So, when I think back to, like, the early days of writing, it's like, I didn't have any children, and it was like, you come home and you're like, "Oh, it's the evening. How am I gonna spend my free evening as a childless adult?" And then you can go write.
Right.
But there was a lot more, like, YouTube breaks, and then, you listen to a song and you can space out a little bit because you also know you're gonna have free time the next day. And now it's much more like, "I'm taking the train to work. Well, better take advantage of it."
Right. Find where you can.
Yeah.
I usually say that my characters often tell me what to do rather than the other way around. When you were writing, were there moments where you had to remind your characters that you were the one in charge?
I think there are moments where I had to kinda go back and realize that they're not behaving like themselves, and that's very
That's
annoying.
good.
Where you and I remember hearing it was either Bouchercon or Left Coast Crime, but there was a writer who was talking about that moment of, this is the point where she shoots him. And then there's that annoying voice in your head going, but she wouldn't shoot him. And you know she wouldn't shoot him. But she must, because it propels the story. Then the voice comes back and says, but it wouldn't happen. You are cheating, which is always very annoying. So I've had those moments for sure. Usually where someone is acting impulsive, they don't actually have the clues that would lead them in that direction. And you have to
Right.
go back and build it. So I would say that they wrangle me, if anything.
Okay. All right. I know that feeling. Burn This Night brings readers back to your PI, Kate, who decides to distract herself from some more personal stuff with a murder investigation, as one would do. What was the inspiration for this latest case that you drop her into?
Yeah, so she's got kind of two cases going at once, where she has this kind of DNA shock where she's learns that her beloved father, who's passed away, is not her biological dad, and then simultaneously that she might be related to a cold case killer, which is actually how they ended up catching the Golden State Killer in California.
Yes.
They loaded DNA into one of these websites and found distant relatives and pieced it together. So I was very interested in that. So I wanted to have this kind of cold case. And that was partly because I really wanted to set the book in this town of Wrightwood, where I changed the name. And I needed to get Kate there because it's maybe an hour from Los Angeles. And I needed her to, I needed to kind of come up with a plot where she would be kind of staying there overnight and not just
Right.
commute. And then simultaneously, she ends up getting hired to work on this arson murder where this mentally ill man is accused of setting a fire that killed his sister and some other people. And that was where I wanted to kind of talk about meth-induced psychosis, which is something that is, I know someone who has dealt with that in my personal life, and I've seen it as a prosecutor. It never gets written about. There's one excellent article in The Atlantic that's about it. So I wanted to talk about that, and I wanted to kind of take on the challenge of writing this character whose sanity kind of declines every time they appear in a chapter. So yeah, I would so they both of the murders kind of came from different places, and then I later on kind of try to find different ways that they could potentially be linked together.
A lot of puzzle work.
Yes, definitely.
Does that come naturally for you? The puzzle piecing part of it all, or does it take you a minute do you have to work it all out for yourself first before you commit to it on paper, or do you just kind of flow with throwing your little puzzle pieces out there and letting them merge on their own?
I like to know where they're going to end up. Usually, I have kind of the beginning mix mapped out, and I know where it's going to go, and then I have a massive freak out in the middle. Um, Yeah, right now I've been struggling a little bit with trying to come up with the endings on some things. But yeah, I like to know where they're going, and then and there's definitely a lot of struggle with moving the pieces. It
Mhm.
comes naturally to have different kind of threads and different kind of different dramatic scenarios that kind of are maybe aren't connected but go well together kind of aesthetically. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Um, but I have to work at it to make the plot click into place and not just be totally self-indulgent.
that's tricky because
Yes.
I think it's sometimes we really do just want to write for ourselves.
Oh, yeah. My husband's a very good check on that. Like, I'll go in a totally wacky tangent, and then things will get insane, and he'll be like, "Self-indulgent. Like, you don't need the circus. Like, sexy trapezist has no place in this small town. Get rid of or just whatever
Right,
insane thing
right.
that doesn't belong there."
Kill them off.
Yeah, kill him off or don't put him in there in the first place.
Or kill them all.
Or kill him
We
off.
we write crime fiction. I mean, just
Yeah. I mean, that's always the answer when
mhm,
you can't think of what to do next.
mhm,
It's like, I'm really stuck. Here
just
I
kill
am.
them.
I'm in chapter 18. What do I do? I guess someone's gonna die.
Mhm, just kill somebody.
Kill somebody.
I tried to write a romance once, and by chapter 6, someone died. So I just decided that that's not gonna be my genre.
There you go.
What is, because this isn't your first go around with Kate, what is your favorite part about writing her?
Um, she's very snarky, which I appreciate. And I like she with both of the books. I like writing characters where something happens that completely upsets their world and everything that makes them them, and then they have to um, basically reconstruct themselves on the fly because I'm evil. But so she's and both of those in different ways. She's kind of had that. So I I like characters who are simultaneously strong and a basket case, and those two things can kind of coexist. And if you've and if, when you've met me, you can probably understand why. But and that's very much Kate. I mean, she's the she's messy, she's spacey. Her place is always a disaster area. She's doing her best as a single mother, not always perfectly, but ultimately she's doing the best she can with flawed raw material, and I think that's what I appreciate about her.
Did you know at the beginning that you were going to put her through so much? Because
Um,
she's dealt with some shit.
that was some shit, yeah. Um, I don't know if I specifically knew everything that well, I think, yeah, probably. She she had originally actually gone through a little bit more in the second book, and my editor was kinda like, "The audience will not forgive you. This must be undone. Have mercy." So I made some tweaks. So she's still, I'm not gonna say that I gave her a break, but I didn't torture her as much as I had previously intended.
Planned. Okay. So she got off light a little
She
bit in
a
this one.
little bit.
What comes next is the favorite question for anything to do with writing. So what comes next for Alex Kenna first? And is there something that comes next for Kate?
Um No, right now, there's nothing that's coming next from Kate. I would love to come back to her at some point. Maybe even skipping further into the future and coming
Oh,
back to her in 5 or 10 years when she's settled. And
right.
I'll have to think of new ways to torture her. Um,
Let her get her feet on the ground first and
yeah, maybe
then
I'll let her get her there's also, I think, you can only torture people so much within a short span of time without
yes.
just, like, it's like, we had the car crash, okay, no more crash, you've done that, you can't
Right.
so she's getting a little room to breathe, but I just, sent a book to my agent I'm pretty excited about. It's set in the courthouse that I used to work in. Um, and if you had a list of the first names of all of my former bosses, you would know who the killer was. Um, I'll just put
I
that
love
out.
it. I
Yeah.
love it.
Um, so that was pretty fun because I got to bring in a lot of just like kind of the weird quirks of working in like a suburban satellite court. So it's kind of a courthouse noir. It's very dark. I guess per brand. Uh, and then right now I've got about 3 different booklets, I guess I'll call them, they're sort of they're all screaming at me that and fighting for primacy, and I'm trying to figure out which one needs to be finished, and which 2 can stay on the back burner.
I I really love calling them booklets.
Yeah, it's like you get to that you get a couple chapters in, and you
Mhm.
can kinda see where they're going, but then then comes the crippling self-doubt, and then you start another one and get a few chapters in, and you're like,
Right.
"You're either both good or you're both terrible, maybe I'll start a third." So I need to focus.
I don't know that I think I'm better that way. If I have a lot kind of
Yeah.
floating around that I can play with rather than
Yeah, I think
just one.
I think it can be sometimes helpful if you're gonna have distraction and procrastination, if you procrastinate on one book with the next book,
It's
and
still
say,
progress.
"Yeah, it's still progress. You're still moving forward."
Exactly. That is the end of my questions. So thank you again for being the first guest on my show. We're just going to put that out there for this little podcast. Let's just do the quick rundown. Where can people find the books? Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can. And also, can I just do a quick plug because I finished your book
Yes.
last night?
Oh,
Everybody should go buy Allie's book. It's a total page turner, and I will say what you do unbelievably well is um, manage to have the creepy, gnarly, dark factor with dead bodies, and also no creepy sexual exploitation of women. And I
mhm.
don't like it. No, it's just a rare balance. So
It's a
everybody
hard
should.
balance.
I'm sure it is, but I won't give anything away, but there's a couple moments where you're like, man, this is dark, but also everybody's appropriately covered. So I really appreciated that as a woman writer and a single woman reader. Um, but
Well,
yes,
thank you.
so everybody buy Allie's book. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter, Blue Sky, and the book's on Amazon. Or you can order from, or ideally you can get one from your independent bookstore, and they'll any bookstore you'd like to go to, you can have them order it, and that'll come in. And because we gotta support indie when we can.
Yes. Do you have a website?
I do. It's alexkenna.com. And I have, for any writers listening, I have a section called Query Letters where writer friends gave me their successful query letters that you can use as a reference point if you're in that phase of pitching people.
So helpful to have those examples out there. So perfect. Thank you again. To learn more about today's special guest, visit my website, aliedh.com. You have been listening to The Writer's Journey with Alie Dumas-Heidt, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network.